Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Purpose Partner Path podcast, where we help women at Crossroads rediscover who they are, become unshakable, and lead with strategic grace. I'm your host, Coach Wendy Gladney, the Purpose Partner. One of the things I've often remind women is that purpose isn't simply about just what you do. Purpose is about who you become while you're doing it. And today's guest is someone who embodies that truth beautifully. Dr. Olusheyi is an international psychologist, public health leader, and healthcare executive whose work has literally improved lives across continents, from communities throughout sub-Saharan Africa to neighborhoods right here in South Los Angeles. She currently serves as Chief Operations Officer of Watts Healthcare Corporation, where she leads efforts focused on health equity, organizational excellence, and community impact. But what impressed me most wasn't simply her impressive resume, it was her commitment to people. She understands that behind every policy, every organization, and every healthcare system, every leadership decision, there are people, there are human beings. Today, we're going to talk about purpose-driven leadership, resilience, cultural intelligence, and how women can lead with both strength and grace. So, you know what we do every week? We go grab our cup of tea so we can get started with another amazing conversation.
Exhale, let go, and enjoy the purpose. Partner, podcast.
So, Dr. Shea, do you mind if I call you Dr. Shea?
That is perfectly fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, welcome to the Purpose Partner Path podcast. Let's start there.
Thank you for having me on, Wendy. And the introduction was just too kind. I really appreciate it. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. And I thank you for taking out time in your busy schedule to do this. And I know so many people are going to be blessed by what you have to share. So, Dr. Shea, one of the pillars of my work is helping women navigate crossroads. I don't believe that crossroads are simply just difficult situations. I believe they can also become invitations to learn more about ourselves and to do better. And I know that you've lived and worked across multiple cultures. You've served internationally and you've held leadership roles in organizations that impact thousands of lives. So that's where I'm going to start our conversation today. When you look back over your own journey, what would you say has been one of the biggest crossroads that has shaped who you've become as a woman and as a leader today?
It's a really great question, very insightful. One of the biggest crossroads in my journey was realizing the difference between ambition and purpose. So starting out in your career and growing into oneself, you're pretty ambitious. You have goals and plans. You often talk about what you want to achieve in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. So there's certain goals and milestones you want to achieve, as it is with most people who are goal oriented. But you become so focused on achieving the next milestone and earning the next opportunity. And I realized that the drive, it came with the experience, which gave me confidence and open doors. And I'm grateful for it. But at some point, I realized I was asking the wrong question as a person, not just as a professional. So instead of asking, how do I position myself for the next opportunity, I started asking, how can I position myself to make greater impact? And that's a subtle shift that changed things quite a bit for me, I will say. That crossroad is the difference between chasing and attracting. So what is meant for you at any given point in time or season in your life will come to you once you start to walk in that purpose. And I figured that out, kind of in the middle of, trying to figure out a certain pivot in my life. So for me, it meant making decisions based less on titles and timelines and more on where I could contribute the most. And that still lives with me right now, and even in my work, the work that I do every day. It also meant letting go of the habit of comparing my journey to anyone else's. I know that as women, we are often conditioned to measure our progress against someone else's success or pace in all aspects of our lives. But it's also important, to share, as I've experienced in my own journey, that purpose doesn't operate in someone else's timeline. conditioned to it though, and it takes a lot of work to sort of step out of that. So I came to understand that fulfilling your purpose isn't about racing towards a destination. It's about embracing the journey, learning along the journey, continuing to grow, and then trusting that each season, is preparing you to make the impact that you're meant to make. Like I just mentioned earlier, that realization shaped the leader that I am today, and continues to shape the leader that I'm becoming. I am still growing in my leadership journey. I still have aspirations, and I believe every leader should have aspirations, but now it's anchored in purpose.
Wow. You use so many like nuggets and buzzwords that just spoke to me. I loved how you talked about in the very beginning about ambition versus purpose. Experience gives us confidence, and chasing versus attracting. I love that because so many people do. They chase, 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 but it's not about that. It's about attracting what is for you. And I'm all about seasons. I have a membership group for women called Seasons of Greatness. And so I'm really big about talking about the various seasons. So thank you so much for just kind of touching on different bullet points that has been kind of a thread for some of the conversations we've had with women. So let me go and say and ask many women that are listening today are still trying to figure out their next chapter. They feel stuck. They feel like they're even overlooked in wherever they may be. And some even wonder as they get older, is it too late? So, for example, I'll even share when I actually started my career, even though it's kind of a long story because I did a lot of different things along the way, but I was a mother young. I got married young and was a mother young. And so my career really did not take off until much later in life when many of my friends already had titles and different things like that.
Mm,
Plus, I took a different route because I'm an entrepreneur versus the
yeah.
corporate arena. I've worked with corporate clients, but my journey has been entrepreneurial. But I've talked to so many women that as they get, a little bit older and they're starting to do different things, they feel like it's too late. And
Mhm.
how do you know in it from your experience when a woman or anybody for that matter needs to pivot versus just simply pushing harder where they are?
Mm. Well, first of all, I'll say that no one's ever late, right? You're never late. There's
Agree.
always more time. As long as you have life, there's always time to make decisions and do what you are supposed to be doing. Uh, but when you ask about, knowing when it's time to pivot instead of simply pushing harder, for me, the question isn't, is this hard? Because anything worthwhile is going to be hard. And you have to learn to work through whatever that hard is. When I sense a time to pivot, the question I ask is this still aligned with my purpose? Is what I'm doing still aligned with what brings me the fulfillment, with what allows me to make greater impact? And growth will naturally lead to what I call an opportunity to pivot. You'll get to a point where you start to think, all right, I think it's time for me to make a shift, maybe still use a lot of the skills that I have, but maybe go in a different direction. There have been seasons where the answer was to push harder, to build resilience, right? To develop new skills, learn to be more discerning. I think discernment is very important for leaders. And then just go through these challenges. But there have been moments when I realized I'm pouring all of my energy into something that no longer aligned with the impact that I wanted to have. Um, but it's also important to note that persistence and pivoting aren't opposites. Sometimes the pivot is actually an act of persistence. You're staying committed to your purpose. You're just changing your path. You don't lose anything when you pivot unless you want to. In my experience, if you look through my journey, when I share with especially, um, you know, even high school students or college students, when I share a lot about my journey, um, I tell them, we sit in these career rooms, and I tell them, this is a great time for you to figure out, or to sort of map out, the direction you want to go, but you have to be open, right? I pivoted from technical community health foundations to health administration in community settings to international psychology, where I still draw on my global community and public health foundations as an administrator, but the pivot is now, how can I better understand the populations I serve so that I can help build responsive systems in community centers? Um, our world is also increasingly global, but international health starts in our own backyard, you know. So now I know people who've pivoted completely away from their training and foundational experience. I know people who've came up with me in public health who are career coaches. They've built skills along the way that helped with that pivot, but they realized, you know, my background in public health is great. It's helped me connect with people. It's helped me to understand data. It's helped me to understand, um, you know, helping to analyze and become a better analyst. But I can still carry those skills in supporting people as they discover their own paths, and they're completely fulfilled. But they made that pivot when they realized it was time to just naturally just move into something that would allow them to use their skills, but to impact more lives. Um, so one of the ways I check myself is by asking, am I holding on to something because I'm genuinely called to this, or because I've invested so much I'm afraid to let go?
Yes,
And
that's the question.
yep, those are two very different motivations. When I shifted my focus from ambition to purpose, it became easier for me to recognize the difference. Um, so just, you know, going back to pivot and pushing. Um, Pivot isn't always about abandoning one's journey and the direction one's going, but it's about making sure that you're moving in the right direction. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to push harder, right? It's to have the courage to pivot so that the energy and your resources are geared towards where you want to make the greatest impact.
Yes. And I love the fact that you really talked about taking your skills and your connections with you as you maybe pivot, or make some transitions, because I've pivoted a few times along my journey, but there's still threads that are the same as it relates to skill sets, and it's always been anchored in, like you said, what is my purpose? And for me, my purpose has been in helping others, primarily women, to believe in themselves and to become their best selves. And so when I think about the skill sets that each one of the things I've been involved with, it's just been a complete thread. So you're absolutely right, and I totally agree with you. Let me ask you, so as a psychologist, you've studied human behavior professionally. What are some of the biggest emotional barriers that keep people from stepping into their purpose that they were created for?
Hmm. Very deep question. As an international psychologist, I'm interested in how populations or groups of people are collectively impacted by their environment. So I'll start there. Um, you find this across all cultures, orientations, and backgrounds. So it's pretty universal. People are products of their environments and are shaped by them. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people don't pursue their purpose because they lack courage or motivation. Our decisions as humans are often driven less by logic and more by the way we are wired to perceive risk. So, you know, one of the biggest emotional barriers is loss aversion. You know, so we naturally feel the pain of losing something more intensely than the excitement of gaining something new. Uh, we're comfortable, you know, staying here or staying where we are because it's safe, it's stable, we can see it, we can feel it, it's worked for us. So even if we're meant for something greater, we stay in a situations that are familiar because the cost of leaving feels more immediate than the possibility of what's ahead. Because you don't know what's ahead. You don't know. You could step out of your safe zone and get, you know, bludgeoned, and you know nobody wants that. Um, Another barrier is the, you know, status quo bias, what I call status quo bias. So we tend to mistake familiarity for safety. I just mentioned that earlier. So even when we're unfulfilled, our brains convince us that staying where we are is less risky than stepping into the unknown. And then here's the big one: family and societal expectations can also play a role. So in keeping people from stepping into their purpose, I'll give a few examples just from, you know, in my experience, you know, just around me. You know, some first generation graduates have to grapple between a 9 to 5 that validates their degree versus pursuing an entrepreneurial goal, right? So they, you know, they hear, oh, you know, you're the first in the family to graduate, and now you want to go build a startup or an app somewhere. What does that mean? You know?
Right.
Or, you have a child of immigrants who may feel the expectation of pursuing careers that quote unquote pay the bills and are, again, stable and are prestigious and are, speak to all the hard work, that and all the investment in the child. Uh, the child might want to be an artist, where the familial expectation is you're going to be a physician. So there's that conflict there. And then comparison also plays a significant role. So big one that I mentioned, especially for women, is for everyone really, but as we go along our journeys as women, we often judge our progress against someone else's timeline instead of recognizing that purpose unfolds differently for each of us. So when we're constantly measuring ourselves against others, I started out in this program and this person's further along than I am, or this person was able to, get this type of car, or they got their house, and I'm still here. There's so many ways that we can compare ourselves against measuring ourselves against others, that we end up chasing their definition of success instead of discovering our own.
Yeah.
And maybe our definition of success is not, the $500,000 job a year. Maybe it's, sitting alongside, your community members and supporting them, right?
Yes.
Which maybe doesn't pay $500,000 a year, but you're fulfilled, and that's what drives, why we really exist as people. So, um, I believe that purpose requires faith and intentionality as well.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that the biases that influence your decisions, and ask yourself, am I making this choice because it's truly aligned with who I am and what I'm called to do and what I'm passionate about and what makes me fulfilled, or simply because it feels safer? Um, so I think becoming aware of those patterns is important.
Hmm.
It may be hard to break those patterns. I mentioned some of those factors in an environment that influence those decisions, but I think that's a good place to start, is looking at one's attachment, emotional attachment to what success means, and
Yes.
how that may serve as a barrier to stepping into purpose.
Yes. And I think one of the things you also talked about, when we compare ourselves to other people and what we think means for their success or their timeline, we don't know what different people are also dealing with on the other side, of their life. You may only see the social media side, or you may only see the public side that they want you to see, but they may not be dealing with some of the same things you might be dealing with. So you have to be very careful, and it's not apples to apples, in terms of comparison. So, I really love the fact that the way that you talked about that purpose rarely begins with certainty. It
Yeah.
usually begins with courage and understanding and seeking. So, thank you for that. So, I'd like to move now to talk a little bit about my second pillar, which is called becoming unshakable. So we all know that life is going to shake us and that leadership will stretch us. But we don't have to fall apart just because things get difficult. It was similar earlier. You were talking about, anything worth having may have some hard times to it. Every day is not going to be on easy street. So I want to ask you, Dr. Shave, you've worked through public health crises before, and organizational transformation and complex leadership challenges. How do you personally, you just remain grounded in all of this, while you're working through all of this, and making sure that you are certain as it relates to how you're leading?
Well, speaking of public health crises, I go back to the COVID-19 pandemic, and y- y- you don't have to have all the answers. None of us did. I certainly didn't. Um, one minute you have these, plans for, you're looking at a strategic plan and you have these plans to implement certain things, and then you have to, speaking of pivoting, you have to pivot, and you go from a place of stability to crisis intervention, an emergency response, and a lot of uncertainty. The landscape is uncertain. Uh, you feel uncertain. I certainly was. But what is more important is not having all the answers during crises, but being willing to figure things out. and listening to your people and being present. Really, that's what worked. Is I don't have the answers. A lot of people don't have the answers, but we're going to figure this out together, and we're going to be present, and we're going to listen to people, um, our people around us, um, and that's what reinforces confidence during those times. Um, what doesn't change during those periods of time is, especially for us, was the resilience of our people, and just remaining anchored in that. We're here to serve the community. That's our North Star. That's why we're here. And our
Right.
community needs us more than ever right now. So that was the constant. You can figure out everything else around that. So where there's so much variability, around how this is transmitted, where we're going to get the, protection from, how do we ensure that we're still able to see patients safely and serve our community safely? There's so much variability around that, but the constant is this is our why. We're here to serve. Um, and so uh, that helped us to stop trying to control every outcome. And I certainly, for me, in operations, and just focus on making the next right decision with the information that I have. Um, so that helped me to remain grounded. It's probably the largest event. But on a day-to-day basis, when there's uncertainty for me, is it's very important for me not to adjudicate an issue without having as much information as possible. When we're under pressure, our brains naturally gravitate towards fear, urgency, worst case scenarios. But knowing that facts are important, objectivity is important, helps me to pause before reacting. Um, so I'm asking myself, am I responding to the facts, or am I responding you know, to my fear? I hear something, I want to act quickly because that's what you do in operations. You act, you execute. But I like to take a step back and make sure that I, have all the facts. Sometimes I've had to make decisions very quickly, but it's just, being confident that if I'm making the decisions, I'm owning the consequence or the outcome of it, and I'm okay with that. But it's important for me to make those decisions, based on substance, and not just the emotions of it. Um, I also stayed grounded, that and reminding myself that leadership is really about stewardship. So my responsibility isn't to predict the future perfectly. It's not to predict what's, this perfect outcome, but it's to just lead with consistency,
Yes.
and stay adaptable, and then create the clarity for people who are counting on me, or just counting on leadership. It's just creating that clarity. And that's what's been helpful for me.
Listening to all that you shared, and then even going back to talking about when we were all in COVID and so forth, one of the things I think about is that s- in s- a lot of people measure success even by saying, "Oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm burned out," or whatever.
Mm.
And sometimes, we have to make sure that we're protecting our own well-being. And as we're dealing with the tremendous responsibility that we carry, how do you try to make sure that, you don't deal with burnout on a regular basis? And I say regular basis because all of us that are especially doing community work and service, you're going to experience at some point, some level of it. But, what are some of the ways that you try to overcome consistent burnout?
Mm. Burnout is real.
It is real.
Burnout
That's
is
what I'm saying.
real.
It is very real.
It is. Um, you don't have to burn out to be successful. I think that um, one of my learnings, in my role as a leader. Society trains us to wear burnout as a badge of honor. But burnout can also be mentally, physically, and relationally damaging. You're taking the burnout. You're one person that's navigating, the professional world, but you're also navigating your professional life as well. And those things are intertwined. I think they tell us we can compartmentalize, and work can be here and then your personal life can be there, but I think they bleed into
They
one
do.
another
They do.
sometimes. Yeah. So burnout isn't one instance or period of doing so many things at once that you're too tired to even think or move. Um, I've had some of my days, some days like that. But um, addressing burnout for me has required a lot more intention. And it starts with the mind, right? It starts with the mindset. So it's um, if you're walking or you're doing what you want to do, right? Even the hardest days are fine. I will say that. Even the hardest days are you feel the burden of the hardest days or the hardest periods of time, but you're able to navigate through it because you've mentally prepared yourself, to get through it and to get through it well, right?
Yeah.
And so the sense of why, I keep going back to that, and your purpose has to lead during those moments. Um, but then even more practically, it's also learning to give myself timeouts and knowing when I've reached my limit. Um, and you know, I work with leadership right now, and I'm seeing that in my leadership where it's okay to say, you know what, we've talked about this. Let's revisit it some other time because we've realized we've all reached our limit, and it's okay to. It's really good practice as leaders to be able to recognize what your limit is and just say, it's time out and revisit it some other time. It's really important. So that's that I apply that in addressing burnout, and then protecting your peace is a
Totally.
big one.
Mm-hmm.
So I read a funny quote somewhere. It said, if you want to be liked, don't become a leader. Just go ahead and sell ice cream. And it's really funny because everybody wants to be a leader. Everybody wants to walk around the title, but at the end of the day, it's more grit than glamour. So people are going to misunderstand you, right? You will make decisions that won't always be popular, but you can't make everybody happy. And if as a leader, one is overly concerned with being liked or avoiding criticism, it'll affect your well-being and lead to burnout.
Yeah.
You burn out very quickly.
I think one of the
Um,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, and a lot of what I hear you also talking about deals with having margin in your life.
Yes.
Try to keep margin. And when you do that, it allows you to be able to space, breathe, pause, and reflect, before you jump into, your next, scenario or answer. And for me, this kind of leads me into one of my next questions for you, which is our third pillar with the purpose partner is called strategic grace. And oftentimes people confuse grace with weakness. I believe
Mm.
grace is actually one of the strongest leadership tools that we could possess. And I think of strategic grace means that you lead with wisdom. And that's part of what you were talking about leading with wisdom, setting healthy boundaries, making thoughtful and thorough decisions, and never allowing success to cost you your peace. So that kind of, just kind of touched on that. What's your definition of grace in leadership?
I like that, strategic grace. Actually agree with how you defined it. I will also add that to me, grace in leadership is the ability to lead with both strength and humanity.
Hmm.
It means remaining composed under pressure, making difficult decisions with compassion, and
Yes.
then treating people with dignity even when accountability is required. So your more rudimentary leadership believes that you can't really do both, right? Um, if you're too gracious, it's perceived, or compassionate, it's perceived as a weakness. Um, or that you're a horrible person if you hold people accountable. Um, Extremes in one expression of leadership, in my opinion, is not ideal. So grace, another definition for me is, grace isn't about avoiding the difficult or hard conversations. It's about how you navigate them.
Yeah.
That is that is a continuous. It's a learning for me all the time because people are different, right? It means listening before reacting, extending respect even when there's this disagreement, which may be tricky to do sometimes. Um, and it also means extending grace to yourself as a leader. And we
all
don't
the
talk a
time.
lot about that. We talk about how we extend grace to everybody else and how we're compassionate with other people. As leaders, we often carry the weight of our teams, um, our organizations, our communities. Um, the responsibility of the work sometimes comes home with us. And we're in go, 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 go mode all the time that we're the last people to give ourselves grace.
So true.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So, giving myself permission to learn, recalibrate, like I mentioned earlier, and not be perfect all the time is just as important as offering grace to others.
That's
Mhm.
so true. Some of the subject matters that you were bringing up and talking about, I cover in a presentation that I teach to professionals called The Art of Professional Etiquette and Protocol. And it deals with, how to handle that within the workplace, but also for yourself. And so it reminded me of that. I can't believe how fast time goes, but I have a couple more quick questions I really would like you to address. And one of them would be is we all know that healthcare is changing rapidly. Technology is evolving, communities are changing. People are even, now looking to healthcare on AI and, just
Mm.
all the different things that are happening. What qualities do tomorrow's leaders need if they want to lead people, not just organizations, but people when it comes to, the well-being around healthcare?
Simply put, courage. That's it. Um, the courage to step forward when nobody else will. The courage to make decisions without knowing what's coming behind that, what the outcome would be. Um, the courage for innovation and to pursue new things that um, may not have naturally aligned with healthcare, especially in our, my type of environment with healthcare, as we've known it. And, being that person that, or that leader that moves forward with innovation. It's being able to, having the courage to recognize that community needs are changing and evolving, and it's looking inward and looking at the organization and saying, how do we adapt to these evolving needs so that we continue to serve the community? Courage is really it.
It, you couldn't have said it better. So as we begin to close, could we have a little bit of fun real quick?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions, and if possible, just give me one word for your answer. Okay, here we go. Leadership means,
Courage.
purpose means,
Impact.
resilience means,
Perseverance.
and success means,
Significance.
grace means.
Compassion.
I love it. So, if you could recommend one book to to our listeners that you would recommend that they read, what would it be?
A book I recommend is Don't Believe Everything You Think.
I'm going to
It's
down.
Yeah, it's an easy read. It's a very small book. It's not a leadership book per se,
Okay.
but but a foundational trait for leadership is self-awareness.
Mhm.
For leaders, it's this book's greatest value is the reminder that the quality of your leadership often depends on the quality of your thinking, or your ability to recognize when your thinking is, or what you're thinking about gets in the way. Um, so I really enjoy the book because helped me to think through the mental narratives, so that we tend to create when we see situations or events or scenarios. Why do we think about them? What meaning do we attach to those scenarios? And learning that so that it can help make clearer decisions and communicate more effectively, and then create calmer and more trusting environments for teams. Mhm.
Excellent. And what's one daily habit that helps keep you centered?
Express gratitude.
That expressing
Yeah.
gratitude.
Hmm.
So, Dr. Shea, I am so excited that you were able to join us today. I was looking forward to it. So, let me ask you, is there one thing that's still on your heart that we didn't discuss or get to that you would love to make sure you leave with our listeners? Please share.
Yeah. Um, I would say for aspiring leaders, don't wait until you feel completely ready. I don't think anyone is ready. We're not born ready to lead because leadership occurs in dynamic environments. Leadership simply happens by saying yes to opportunities um, and embracing the challenges that come along with it, and then trusting that your experiences, your life experiences, prior work experiences, um, the way that you relate to others have prepared you for more than you realize.
I believe that's so true, so true. And oftentimes it's not until we just jump out there and start doing it that we realize, oh, okay, I can do this. Or, I'm not as behind as I thought, or everybody
Mhm.
doesn't know more than I do anyway. But
Yes.
it's not until you have the courage,
Yeah.
So, I thank you again. And I just want to tell
Thank
everyone
you.
who's listening, today's conversation reminded us that leadership isn't simply just about titles. It is about influence. Do you care about people? Are you willing to make a difference? Purpose isn't found in just a position, it is found in service and giving to others. Resilience isn't pretending life is easy, it's learning how to remain rooted when life does become difficult. And strategic grace reminds us that we don't have to choose between compassion and strength because the best leaders have both. And as Dr. Shea shared with us, though it is about a balance, you can't give too much, you can't give too much string, or too much rope that the person hangs themselves, but you got to give them enough. And you have to show a little bit of compassion. And everyone listening, remember, you may be at a crossroad today, but crossroads are not dead ends. I always think of them as invitations for new things. They are places where God often introduces us to the next version of ourselves. I also want to let you know that I am so excited. My latest book is finally out in paperback, The Purpose Partner Method Handbook, and you can find it on my website at wendygladney.com. And please visit all my socials at Wendy Gladney. And Dr. Shea, if somebody would like to contact you, what would you like to leave? How can they find you or follow you or keep up with you?
LinkedIn.
Okay.
LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me.
Awesome. So there you go. You can keep up with Dr. Shea through LinkedIn. So thank you again. And until next time, I am Coach Wendy Gladney, the Purpose Partner, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Purpose Partner Path podcast. Goodbye, everyone.
Exhale, let go, and enjoy the purpose. Partner, podcast.